So I'm wondering if we can start with you and ask what it means to you, Kate, day to day to run a business that's conscious in the industry you're working in.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said in the industry that I'm working in, because I think in particular for the cannabis industry right now, it starts with being conscious of how we got here, and how we got here is on the backs of thousands and thousands, mostly people of color and minority groups that have been victims of the war on drugs. And I think first and foremost, it starts being aware of that so that we can do our part in rectifying the harms of that. And how we are doing that at Miss Grass is a number of different ways. First, on the magazine side, it's around shining a light on that and providing the educational resources so our community becomes conscious consumers. They know what they're consuming, they know the ingredients in their products, they know who's behind the brands that they love, and then they vote with their dollar. And I think that's so important, especially in our industry.
Thank you. Chandanni, how about you?
Yes, I totally concur with what you're saying. Brand awareness, we're bringing integrity back to manufacturing, hopefully with sustainable brands and brands that are consciously inspired. And also that in order to create a brand or a technology that will be received by the marketplace, you have to work extremely hard, and you have to do most of it yourself most of the time. And I have such profound respect now after 4.5 years to people, CEOs, founders of companies that I used to sort of like just overlook, like, oh yeah, that guy, he's just Salesforce, big deal. Like the fact Mark Benioff has created Salesforce, I don't know if you know about this company, it's amazing. In order to create a brand or a movement or a business, whether it's for profit or for changing the world for the better, you have to work extremely diligently, extremely hard. And also, I think that you have to constantly be redefining and redesigning, and you have to be very quick. It's almost like being a cell phone. Like you have to kind of upgrade all the time. So I think did I answer adequately?
No.
You have to understand that we have a certain chemistry, and it's sort of, from a past life must be.
I was having a little fun there. I'm curious what is that essence of the consciousness in your brand? I can kind of feel it intuitively, and I can feel it emanating from you, but I'd rather not put the words on it. There's something you're bringing.
Okay, the only reason I'm a sales gal, because that's basically what I do as a brand, I'm a sales gal, I only care about people becoming radiant, happy, and whole. And I don't care who it is, I don't care how old they are, where they're from, what kind of skin they have. I want every single human being on the planet to be happy, healthy, and whole, and to be fabulously unique. Where's Valeria? I want everyone to be as fabulous as Valeria. Like, that's my heart's longing. That's why I do what I do. Seriously, I wake up in the morning like, are you feeling amazing, like really like happy, healthy, and whole, like all day, every day? So I was like, are you excited? I'm so excited. Life is just like, wow. Right, Dr. Nitya?
That was perfect. I want to ask you, Adam, from an investor perspective, is consciousness in the businesses that you're investing in what you're looking for, or is it as much about a conscious approach to investing? How do these things play together or not? And what the hell does impact investing mean? If you want to answer that.
Awesome. I'll maybe answer backwards. So, impact investing to me is, when we usually talk about impact investing, what we're really saying is we recognize that all investing has an impact. And we want to be conscious of the totality of the impact of the businesses that we're investing in. Non-impact investing is still impact investing, it's just investing without an awareness of the impact of the things that we're investing in. As for what I look for as an investor, and whether I'm looking for consciousness, I think I want to answer that question by actually examining the premise of, or the definition of capitalism. And capitalism is, we can think about that as any kind of activity, a way of engaging, of doing things, of busyness, that is based on a premise of finitude, of a zero-sum premise. And it's actually right there in the word. Capitalism is the ism or the practice based on a premise of capping it all. There's a cap on it. It's finite. That's why it's called cap-it-all-ism. And so to me, conscious capitalism is actually doing business and conducting our lives in a way that's based on a premise of infinity, of total abundance, of unlimited possibility. And that's what I look for when I'm investing in companies.
It's good so far, right? I think so. Daniel or Mike and Mike, what I want to ask, I'm just going to ask it, is what emerges when you hear some of these answers, given your perspective on the deep psyche? Yeah, go for it.
Well, in terms of the impact of what we're talking about in the deep or the shallow psyche, it's not an intellectual problem that needs to be solved if somebody's in crisis and they need money. It's not an intellectual problem to be solved if somebody's having a panic attack or an anxiety attack or suffers from chronic depression and they don't know how to get help and they feel limited by their finances, so they don't ask for help. In following that thread of how that person got put into that position, whether it's true or not, because oftentimes, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, so I say all of this with compassion, we don't know what we don't know, so I might be shutting myself off to things that are available to me that I'm not aware of. So it's complex for all of us at every level, but again, following the thread of that person who might be between the ages of 15 and 29, we'll say, to the legislation and the policy and the regulation that's passed and everything that we're talking about, not everything, but the intellectual side of what we're talking about, the macro side, the economics, these larger concepts, all of which are important. But when you ask about the deep psyche, there's a very human cost that we're all aware of on some level. We all know somebody, if not ourselves. So the impact in the deep psyche, and again the shallow, is when that word value, from a hypnotherapist's point of view, I imagine Jungians as well, it's not necessarily coincidental or insignificant that the word value pertains to both money and emotions. So as our value is tied together with the psychology of how much money or how much we think we're worth on any given day. For anybody who's ever lived month to month, that can be a rough position. So being able to separate, and again, I say this for all of us, perhaps, well, yes, just all of us, being able to separate our psychology and the way we operate in the world and understand each other versus perhaps the numbers in our bank accounts.
Sure. Let's see. So, from a Jungian archetypal perspective, the psyche is perfect. The self is perfect. The universe is perfect. The human mind is perfect. From that, we create civilization that then creates the illusion of lack. And I believe that the psyche gets hold of that idea and runs with it. And then we're running from the experience of lack. We're not beautiful enough. We're not rich enough. We're not healthy enough. We are all these things that are coming from lack. Thus, the birth in our civilization and its discontents creates this idea that we're not happy. We're not as good as our neighbors. We're not working as hard as our colleagues and making as much money, and we're not in the right place. To me, this is all illusion. Now, I know that might sound crazy, but I come from that space that is, we are none perfect, exactly how we are, not how we aren't. And when I'm working with patients, they are coming from a space that is depression, is anxiety, is whether they're hearing voices that aren't there, at least other people are saying they aren't there. To me, everything is a symptom of something else. And all of those symptoms are calling for attention. The psyche is trying to heal itself. The culture is trying to heal itself. We're all trying to heal ourselves. And if we get out of the way, we will heal. The problem is that we're living from an illusion of lack. And that generates a feeling of unhappiness and pain and suffering. And that's what we're seeing. I've worked with homeless people who are 10 times happier than billionaires. And I've seen obviously the opposite as well. So what I do experience, or what I'm thinking here as I listen to everyone, is, there's a lot, what's happening is beautiful. Like, I'm starting to see the whole concept of capitalism turning on itself to say, okay, yes, we are coming from some sense of lack. So now we're going to put some consciousness to it and create beauty and create that equality that we all are. But we have to kind of like fight through the system of doing it. I think it's kind of frustrating, to tell you the truth, because I think we're all seeking and feeling the same thing, which to me is love. And we come from a lack of love. We're all seeking love as if we don't have it, but we do. I know that's tough to believe, but then you start talking about practices. Hypnotherapy is a wonderful way to connect to that. Working with products, having products that are now have integrity is a new beginning. This is a beautiful thing we're starting to see happen here, because it's getting us in touch with who we are, nature. This is where we come from. So if products are coming from nature, we're going to feel better about ourselves when we need to put something on to make ourselves feel better. So I see this in that dynamic.
Thank you. I feel a tension in my own being around the phrase conscious capitalism. On the one hand, I take a sort of conventional, very leftist approach to my understanding of capitalism and cringe at the idea that somehow we can conscious our way out of exploitation. And on the other hand, I'm sitting in the presence of people who I feel the truth and beauty of their mission, and their sense that this mission can be made real through the system of capitalism. And I want to ask the panel, and whoever wants to take it, to explore that tension as it appears within you, and as it might be useful for people to hear, with this special emphasis on how conscious capitalism might really be moving us in the right direction, even as we can't fail to acknowledge some of the facts that we're standing on, or the fundamental limitations of the system, or the homeless people who can't even participate in this conversation. But there is beauty here still, and can we find it in this last 10 minutes of the panel?
It's a very loaded gun there.
Shoot it wherever you want.
Oh, wow. So, I feel very strongly about this beautiful question you posed, and I'm going to be quick so that we can all contribute. I feel like we're in a time where we cannot be divisive anymore. and we cannot be exclusive anymore. We need to be inclusive. I just want to talk about Facebook for a minute because I put deliberately a picture of Melania Trump on my wall. I mean, I'm like, I'm a total tree hugger. Like, politics is just not my forte. I think they're all evil. But I did it specifically because I feel as much grace in Melania Trump as I do in Trump himself, as I do in you, as I do in myself, as I do in Dr. Nityan. I feel that not to be complacent and not to have accountability and not to take a stand, but the nature of inclusivity, that if you don't see the divine in all, you don't see the divine at all.
I'm not really sure how to answer this, but I think your question was posing a question, something that's addressing the conflict of what it means to make money in a world that...
With the hope that you would make people feel good.
Exactly, and that's for me the conflict comes in, like when I'm working with, say, someone who's been in and out of jail and hospitals with mental illness defined by culture, and then I have to charge them something to come and see me. And so sometimes I do feel like I have to not charge them or something like that, where I try to go through insurance, which also doesn't really pay for therapy in the right way. So sometimes it does feel a little bit conflicting when I have to make a living myself, while at the same time I'm trying to serve. So, I mean, if the question that goes into how do you do that, or how do you metabolize the anxiety around that, I kind of go to Rumi and I say I put love into everything that I do. And if I put love into everything that I do, then I know I'm in my integrity and I just stay there. And when I have to charge, I will not charge someone who can't afford it. I'm one of those people who will actually do therapy for people who can't afford it for like $40 an hour. You know, don't put that on my website, but I do. And I actually have done that and I am doing that like right now. And then there's the other people who, can afford it. And so I work with that too. So, I mean, it's an interesting conflict for me. It's the same thing when I'm working on movies. And, these movies, there's a lot of money in movies, and, you're sitting there thinking, okay, they're going to make this movie Heal, which is about everything that's going on in this room, where people are trying to find healing, alternative approaches to healing for chronic illnesses. And it's a big business, it's a big film that they got, Deepak Chopra and all the big guys in there. And then I'm asked to compose the music and they don't have a huge budget, so I'll just say, what can you afford? Because let's get this movie out there. So sometimes you do just have to kind of go into your sadhana and say, here, my path is sometimes, it's not about making a lot of money, it's about putting love into everything you do and it comes back.
Just tagging on to what has been said about making people feel whole, about offering a service and healing, I can say the same. At the beginning and the end, there's that sense of purpose, that reminder, which again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I have memories of my dad that I can go back to that keep me grounded in my family and in that mission. But everything in between there usually is stuff that I wasn't told I would have to do and wouldn't have to think about, or thought I wouldn't have to think about, but everything in between there is that negotiation and that question of who is the person I'm working with now. Am I working with a corporate mindfulness program or, again, a 22-year-old trying to figure it out? So beginning and ending at that place, and then all those places in between, as much as I can for myself, and again, this is just speaking for myself, I have to make it as personal and direct as possible. If I keep it intellectual or hidden behind the phone or invoices or something like that too, it stays less personal and it has less meaning. And usually the business relationship, frankly, isn't as strong either. So there are incentives, of course, capitalistic ones, in forming strong bonds and forming strong relationships. So yes, as my friends and colleagues here have said at the beginning and the end, that sense of what is the service that we're offering truly here, and leaving everywhere we go a little bit better than it was when we found it. Thank you. And thank you very much, WITMA, for having me.
quickly, I know we have to wrap it up, but I think there needs to be a shift around the narrative of capitalism and conscious capitalism, and I think the idea is, or at least previous idea was that, you know, you would do good at the expense of maybe not monetarily good or at the expense of something else. And I think that if we change that and that may be true actually in the short term, but in the long term, if we change that, there's a way that everything, like all tides rise, all boats rise with the tide. Yeah.
Adam? Get the last word.
Sure. Perfect. It's easy to try to intellectualize our way into or out of these kinds of questions, which to me seems similar to the attempt to conscious our way out of capitalism. And there's another way, which is to respond to the question with an attitude of, we'll see. You know, we don't know. But to make it our practice in everything that we do, to pay attention to the quality of ourselves that we bring to it. Because there's a place in each of us where we already know what the right answer is in any circumstance. And it's not an answer that can be systematized or reduced to a universal law. But there's a place where we already know the answer. And the more that we touch that place and act from there, the more we find at some point that the question has actually resolved itself.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you for having us here. Thank you to WITMA for putting this panel together.